give this some context, we've heard a lot about social media and its popularity, and I think there's, fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of hype surrounding Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter, and oftentimes it's difficult to understand the value and or the ROI. Okay, so putting it, taking social media outside the hype and looking at it for what it is, I think it might be important for this conversation. So if you look back and we try to define social media, if we take a look at some of the folks that were involved in some of these same principles that surround social media, you'll look at folks like Napoleon Hill, Tom Peters, Jack Trout, Al Reyes. These were folks that were all about building the individual brand of executives, right? So moving forward, my point was we want to look at social media outside the context of the hype. So if you take a look at these founders of personal branding and what they some of the principles surrounding personal branding and getting your name out there, folks like these that were back, who actually started this movement of personal branding, their principles hold true for social media today. So folks like Napoleon Hill, Tom Peters, Jack Trout, Al Reyes, they're the folks who got people to think about what their individual brands stand for. A lot of social media is built around networking with individuals. So specifically, when you think of social media and your personal brand, you think of what does it mean for a company? Well, with a company, it's more about their name, their logo, their website, the type of emotions that are conjured up when you think of a brand like Coke or Adidas or what have you. Similarly, it's important to think about when people think of you as an individual, what do you stand for? What do they think when they think about you? So social media, again, it allows you to create an image of yourself that's accurate, that allows others to perceive you in the way that you want to be perceived. So that's the starting point, right? And ultimately, you can leverage that to communicate with prospects, with clients, with the types of people that you want to gain influence with. So, to sort of recap, what we use social media for is a way to interact with people on a large scale. So, taking a look at social media and your business itself, there's some basic things that we all know. It allows you to promote yourself, increase awareness, establish your brand, allow folks to get a feel for who you are. Oftentimes with LinkedIn, before somebody meets me, they take a look at my LinkedIn profile to get a feel for who I am, what type of people I'm connected to, where I went to school, and then that way we can build, they can build rapport with me and who I am. Prior to even meeting me, they have an idea of what that is, and social media is a great way to do that. And ultimately, these types of tools, just like some of these brands that we see on the screen here, when you're positioned as an individual properly on social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. Maybe not so much Facebook if you're a person. People tend to like to keep their Facebook profiles for friends and family, but LinkedIn and Twitter here are good tools to allow you to position yourself in the right way. No different than a large brand. Okay, so it takes some time and some cultivation to create the right sort of social profile for you. Interesting slide here. Recently we've started dealing with a lot more companies that were anti-Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, manufacturing companies, some of these companies that are really slow to come around when it comes to LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter or using any of those tools for prospecting or anything like that. Recently, we've brought on a lot more customers or generated interest from a lot more customers who are seeing themselves as behind the curve. Initially social media and LinkedIn and all these types of things were sort of novel approaches, and they really weren't sure of the ROI and had all these kinds of questions. Now, one of the things that's taking place is, when they look out 3 years, 5 years from now and then think about where they want their business to be, they're realizing there's younger executives coming up, and if they don't have a proper presence on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and not only that, not just the presence, but are not actively engaged in conversations on those platforms, they're probably going to be less competitive. So, I've got a movie here from the 80s. You got Gordon Gekko with one of those old school brick phones, and similarly, you can make that analogy that people today who are not up on some of these tools and platforms, are analogous to those folks who are still, sort of behind the times. Next slide. So one area that we've really been focused on and been able to deliver an ROI for folks is relationship selling. Okay, and the neat thing is when you are connected to somebody on LinkedIn or on Twitter, the folks that they're connected to can see what you're saying. Okay, all that goes back to the idea of social selling, right? So you can take a look at, if I introduce somebody that I know to another one of my contacts that, those two do not know each other, well, person number one and person number two will, by virtue of knowing me, they'll have the social contract. They'll be more likely to trust one another if it comes from a friend, namely in this sort of example, myself introducing two other people that I know, saying, hey, this guy's good to work with, you should know him. So, when we talk about sort of being able to generate buy-in, people believe stuff when they hear it from their friends, so recommendations from people I know. So social media, because it allows you, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Twitter, it allows folks to introduce and interact with people much more effectively and ultimately build a lot more credibility and trust because others outside of their network can see some of that communication going on. So some really good examples of personal brands. Barbara Corcoran, she's a real estate mogul out of New York who's done a really good job in developing her personal brand consistently. Mark Cuban, everybody has sort of an idea of what he stands for and what he's like. And so, analogous to that, on a lower level, most executives can utilize Twitter and LinkedIn to create a similar sort of persona and ultimately get more credibility in the marketplace and generate more relationships. So think about it in terms of the business of you, what you stand for, what are your key traits, are you supporting a cause, that's something that you want to be vocal about on LinkedIn and or Twitter. Really focusing on your online identity. So what happens when somebody Googles you? Do you think they would want to work with you based on the results that they saw? Because that's the first thing a lot of people do is go right to Google and or LinkedIn just to look somebody up, just to find out what they're about. So thinking about that and paying attention to it is pretty important. Here's some basic things that we should be doing on LinkedIn and Twitter. Definitely, as I mentioned in the last slide, develop a plan, more or less, about who you are, what you stand for, what things you want people to know about you, before they meet you. That's important to have in a social profile. Measurable goals. So what are the types of people that you want to connect with? Are they CFOs? Are they VPs? And develop your profile accordingly and search those folks out and follow them on Twitter, connect with them on LinkedIn. Generally on Twitter, if you follow somebody, they'll follow you back. And then once that happens, you can start a dialogue and develop a business relationship with them. Being a good citizen, so being a good social citizen, right? So what you don't want to do is, and we generally know this, it's generally good etiquette, you don't want to slam a company, you don't want to, talk about the bad day that you're having, or call out a, God forbid, a client of yours publicly on Twitter or on LinkedIn. It's just not good practice, and generally it turns off a lot of people. being consistent, as I said before, super important. Understand sort of the key traits of your personal brand, of your company's brand, and focus in on those consistently. You don't want to be one of those folks who are just, number one, being very salesy on Twitter or on LinkedIn, and number two, just kind of all over the map as to what they're talking about. People tend to tune those people out, especially if you think about how much messaging we get when we log into Twitter or LinkedIn. There's just a slew of folks talking about a number of different things. So if you develop a focused message, it tends to work a lot better. Focus on the type of content that you want to share. Are they, you can share a lot of stuff on LinkedIn and on Twitter in terms of articles from third parties, Economist Magazine, Inc. Magazine, Fortune, Forbes, whatever you want. There's a lot of content that you can share. And essentially engaging the folks that are on your network. Once you build a strong network, you want to reach out to those people consistently. Not use that. There's folks on LinkedIn that have 500, 600 connections, and many more. But they're not actively interacting with those folks, so their network is really going to waste. So you want it. Once you've got a large network, or any number of followers and connections on LinkedIn, you certainly want to engage with them on a semi-regular or regular basis through good content. So last thing is being a good listener. A lot of times people want to broadcast only stuff about them and how great they are. Well, that's very equivalent to the person you meet at a networking event who's telling you all about themselves. There's certainly a time and place for that, but generally, understanding who's watching your profile and who's been paying attention to you, and catering to their needs. What do they do? How can you help them? Is pretty important. Case in point, we've got a client who he caters to chief financial officers. So on his LinkedIn, he's not talking about all the great things that his company does. He's sharing information to make the CFOs that are part of his network, their lives better. So he'll post top 10 things as a CFO that you should know. Small, neat articles that get attention. And he can use those as a tool, or as a catalyst, I should say, to start a conversation with a potential, set up a meeting, and then go from there. Those types of things work a lot better, than cold calling or just kind of reaching out to somebody out of the blue. So, kind of an important thing here. One of the things that we've seen recently is lack of compliant content. So it used to be that you can find something on Google, post it virtually, and you'd be okay. Well, there's a lot of photographers and writers out there that are going after folks who are copying and pasting their content online. This is copyrighted content. We had one client that was, prior to becoming a client, they had found an image on Google and posted it on their website. Well, they got sued for $25,000 because the photographer that took a picture of that four-leaf clover said, hey, that's my picture, and I didn't give you the rights to use that. So when you're posting content, generally original content that you create is the best. So ideally, that's what you want to do. If you're not, then just be really careful about where you're getting that content from, and if it's okay to post, because you certainly don't want to be sued. And we're seeing a lot more activity in that regard. So compliant content, you can Google that, and there's a lot of information surrounding that. So if you want to engage in some of these types of platforms, definitely know sort of the limits of what you can and cannot do. So this slide here is about the things that you shouldn't do. a lot of times people think of social media, specifically LinkedIn and Twitter, as a popularity contest, and they just want to connect with everybody and anybody on LinkedIn. Well, that's generally not a good practice. You want to connect with the folks that make the most sense for you, and there are ways to do that through utilizing LinkedIn search or searching for specific types of people that make the most sense for you to connect to on LinkedIn and Twitter, and going after those types of folks only. So another thing, that second box there, relying on one application. A lot of times what people do is they try to take a shortcut and they create, let's say, some type of content on a blog, and then they just basically spam it out to LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook and everything else, and their content on each of these networks is exactly the same. That's something that you don't want to do. Facebook is really good for photo type content, even if it's from a company. It's better to, we've got a client that's a printer. They do really high level, visual communication. So Facebook is great for that. LinkedIn tends to be a lot better for person to person communication, as opposed to just broadcasting random content about, how great the company is or their latest project. And making it about the other person is generally better, as opposed to broadcasting on LinkedIn about what you're doing. Ditto for Twitter. It's more about having very specific, targeted conversations. Okay, being pushy is generally not a good thing. So it's interesting. That's a good little graphic there, because oftentimes in the real world at networking events and whatnot, you certainly wouldn't tolerate somebody who's being pushy or asking for the appointment or not knowing anything about you and just generally being more aggressive than they should be. But for some reason, folks online, when they're hiding behind their laptop or in their office, feel like they can broadcast anything and everything online, and it's okay, because and we're not sure why people feel that way, but it's interesting. But I think generally, you want to be cognizant of the same rules, the same social rules that apply, offline apply online. So you want to be, you don't want to be pushy and aggressive and very, very salesy. It just tends to not work. Spamming social sites. So LinkedIn has been fallen victim to a lot of people developing fake profiles and broadcast, and increasing the size of their network to thousands of people and just sending links and sales messaging and all these types of things online in a very aggressive way. It tends to not work. When you're communicating with folks, whether on Twitter, on Facebook, or on LinkedIn, you want to be authentic communication. Reach out to one individual and develop some dialogue there, or if you're broadcasting content, make sure it's going to be content that's interesting to your audience, whether those are VPs, CFOs, etc., whoever those happen to be. One of the other things here in the forgetting to thank people, you certainly don't want to be a bad citizen there. So one of the things that oftentimes people do when they get a connection on LinkedIn or a follower on Twitter, they don't do the simple act of just simply responding to their invite or their following them via a simple thank you. So oftentimes that is the most critical step. When somebody follows you on Twitter or somebody decides to connect with you on LinkedIn, take 2 seconds and say, hey, thanks for connecting. If you've got 10 minutes next week, I'd love to chat with you about what you do and learn about your company. Make it about them. Those types of things, simple things, can open up the conversation with a prospect or with somebody that you want to influence in some way. Okay. And again, you don't need to try and sell people right off the bat. Allow them to discover what you do as over time. They see the content that you're posting and what it's related to, and they want to get to know you. Okay. And again, to my earlier point here, a lot of folks use this sort of generic marketing techniques, and just blast out, sort of spammy content. You definitely don't want to do that. It will get you, blacklisted pretty quickly with people. So make it personal, make it genuine, make it authentic. Okay. So I'm just going to run through this list relatively quickly in terms of the reasons that you want to build your personal brand and engage in having a positive profile on these different platforms. Generally, folks who want to do this, who engage in social media, are folks who want to get ahead and be vocal about what they're doing. Younger executives who want to get as much attention as possible so they get that big promotion, or folks higher level in their career who need to be rainmakers. Oftentimes, partners at law firms engage in LinkedIn and Twitter pretty aggressively, so people know that they really know their stuff. They show off their knowledge. Number 9, it's oftentimes, if you were to Google your name, there's folks who've got some good information, some bad information, some conflicting information. So one of the things is, cleaning up an online image is pretty important, especially if, you're either looking for a job or looking for clients. Again, folks often go to Google to find out who they're about to meet. So it's generally pretty important to make sure that you're how you're perceived online is consistent and how you want to be perceived online in a professional way. Let's see, I'm just going to jump around a little bit here. Certainly number 2, oftentimes, we're working for a client right now who's got some negative things on them, so when you Google their name, it's actually hurts their business. So it's important to do some work to clean up that any type of negative results that could be damaging to a business. Certainly, so we kind of talked about career growth as well, seeking promotion. Oftentimes, when you're in a niche industry, number 6, being dazed and confused is pretty important. You don't want to look like that. Oftentimes, we work with manufacturing companies who just do not have a clear and consistent message out there. And they talk about, well, we offer great customer service. Every one of their competition offers great customer service as well. And if they're starting to market online, they really need to figure out a way to tell the world what they do, either individually or through their company, that really differentiates them in a meaningful way, in an authentic way. So you really got to dig deep to figure out what those things are. But those are some basics there. They kind of overlap a little bit, but it's worth going through those. So this is a slide that we'll spend a little bit of time on. When you do engage in social media, and by that I want to say LinkedIn, Twitter, as it applies to business, LinkedIn, Twitter, and or a blog oftentimes is more than enough. I'm not a big believer right now in Facebook for all types of businesses. I think it tends to work a little bit better for retail and nonprofit. But getting back to this slide here, you certainly want to establish your goals. What are you trying to get out of your social media campaign? Is it doing it just to do it? Because that doesn't make a lot of sense. So, listing out what the objectives are and how they relate to your business is important. Number 2, who's your market? Who do you want to connect with? And where are those people? Are they on Facebook? Then that's fine. Are they on more of them on Twitter? That's fine. Go after that. But you want to really develop a program that has metrics and goes after people where they're at, right? So there's a lot of really neat tools out there. If we're looking at number 3 here, there's Sprout Social. There's a lot of different tools available that show you, okay, are people talking about you? Are they not talking about you? How many mentions have you gotten? And oftentimes, if you get a mention, whether it's on Twitter or on wherever, you want to be able to track that and reach out to those people because they're certainly talking about you. Could be good or bad, right? So it's important to know sort of what's going on there as well. It's in that same vein, you want to look at your brand's persona, whether that's your personal brand or your corporate brand, and see how, is the image that you have of you similar to the image that others have of you? Are they seeing you as a high quality product? Are they seeing you as a low level product? And you can do that pretty easily by just sort of utilizing some basic monitoring tools that are out there that will allow you to see some of the communication that's taking place about your brand. Okay. Number 5, super important, establishing a content strategy. What we do for clients is we develop an editorial strategy, an editorial calendar. So what are we talking about on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? One of the things that we do is on LinkedIn, we make sure to post Monday mornings a video, because one of the things that we see is LinkedIn traffic spikes on a Monday, and that's because when people come into work Monday mornings, oftentimes they log into LinkedIn and they don't actually start their workday right away. They log into LinkedIn and see what their connections are doing. So, often posting a 1-minute video, the first thing that people do is before they watch a video, they want to see how long it is. So that's really important. Developing a content strategy that speaks to your audience. Engaging good content. Whether that's video or whether that's text or photos, etc. Again, setting up your metrics, lots of different tools that are available to do that. Figuring out what matters to your business. Certainly any negative things about your business should be pretty important. Setting up KPIs, measuring the return on investment, things like that. Are you generating leads? Are you not generating leads, etc. If you're at a larger company, you can have multiple folks at your business focus on different channels. So have the IT guys, Twitter profile and his messaging talking specifically about IT-related issues, and really customizing different Twitter profiles and or LinkedIn profiles to go after particular segments, to network with those segments and then those different audiences. Number 8, obviously publishing content to the right channels. Looking at your voice and your tone and your humor. For CPAs and attorneys that we work with, they've got a very serious tone about them. They don't, they tend to not be overly humorous because their topics don't lend themselves to be, nor do they want to be seen that way. For others, like the pizza store down the street that we work with, certainly they, it's a lot funner. It's the vibe is a little less serious, and you can get away with that. So when you're publishing content, know the voice and the tone and the level of humor that you should have. Oftentimes that'll impact how people think of you, certainly. Okay. Number 9 here on the bottom, leverage your internal networks. So often we want to reach out to strangers and try to get the sale or try to set up an appointment, or depending on what the goals are. But oftentimes, leverage the folks you already know, whether inside your company or outside your company, because oftentimes you're only a few degrees of separation from the people that you want to meet, and that sort of, they may know somebody that you don't, but if you're connected to them on LinkedIn, you can see the people that they know. It's very easy to do that. And certainly go into that if there's questions. And that's it. And I think number 11 there, obviously, it's not so much to get started. It's easy to get started. A lot of people are very enthusiastic about jumping into Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, and they're going to use it for business, and they're really, really excited, which is great. But the important thing is you want to look at the results and fine-tune what you're doing based on the success or failure of you being involved in trying to network on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn or WordPress or whatever it happens to be. So it's a process. It's not something that you do once and it starts paying dividends. Furthest thing from the truth. You start small and you kind of lather, rinse, repeat based on results. So that's that. So some of these things will apply to this conversation here. So you certainly want to position, number one, pen a distinctive name. For most people, that's their own name. They're not going after a character or anything like that. Focus on a purpose. What's the reason behind why you're going to do this? Put it in writing. Make a list of those types of things. And ultimately, what do you promise your clients, and how are you going to embed that into your communication strategy? And with all these things, I think sometimes it can be very, very overwhelming for folks, and they tend to just not want to be involved once they know, like, oh man, I got to think about compliant content, and I got to think about my brand promise, and all these other things. Well, I think you got to take a step back and just keep things as simple as you can, knowing sort of some of the things that we've gone over. Keep it direct and keep it concise. We don't need to have like a huge budget or a huge marketing campaign around this. It can be very, very simple. And the people that tend to succeed on social media tend to think in simple terms and in direct and concise terms. So those are some things that you should definitely keep in mind. So, and some of this stuff is I'm repeating because it's important to go over it. Differentiating yourself is super important. Knowing why you're unique allows you to sort of fine-tune the communication that you're putting out there a lot more efficiently. Defining your personality. Are you humorous? Are you not? Are you the gregarious type? Are you not the gregarious type? Understanding, that's part of defining your voice as well. Okay. Oftentimes, with whether it's on LinkedIn or Twitter, aligning yourself with a cause, and being socially responsible, gives you a leg up because it shows you as an upstanding citizen. So anything that adds to your credibility or trust factor is important. And there's lots of causes out there that you can support, and that ultimately gets you it's a little bit easier to get conversations and building relationships online professionally with folks, and developing more credibility that way by aligning with a cause. Creating a distinctive look, I think that's slightly more corporate oriented. Certainly we've seen some goofy photos of people on LinkedIn. I certainly don't recommend that. I think it's good to have, in terms of the look and feel of your social profile, to keep it professional, a clean look, whatever that the culture of your business is. You want to put that in a good light, certainly. So we've seen folks with sort of very military style photos on their LinkedIn, and we've gone in and taken headshots of them that are more softer in the tone, and then a nice bright picture is very, very important, because that's what people look at when they see you. Basic stuff, but nonetheless pretty important. Again, finding your voice, we've been over that. Encouraging interaction. A lot of people ask that question. I'm posting stuff on my LinkedIn and Twitter, and people just aren't reaching out to me. Well, simply asking a question sometimes helps. On LinkedIn, reaching out to the people that and asking questions about what they do, seeking their advice, because they're subject matter experts, at least they like to think they are, in their vertical that they work in. So similarly, you want to reach out to them and ask them questions and interact with them. There's nothing worse than a Twitter feed. We look at Twitter accounts all the time, and a lot of folks have maybe 500, 1,000 followers, which is great, but they're literally just broadcasting content almost like spam to their Twitter followers, which is terrible. What you want to really do is have conversations with folks that yield some type of result, a sales meeting, or connecting with them on one thing or another, a project, etc. Utilize that Twitter interaction to show people, other people that may be looking at that interaction, why they should also be connecting with you, right? That's really important, because that's kind of the goal. So here's a couple terms they're almost overused right now in corporate America, I think, at least. Being a thought leader. Everybody wants to be a thought leader. Okay, that's great. But, I think to do that sincerely, you really have to focus on, number one, what you're passionate about, what you're interested in, and those types of things, and really talk about them with knowledge and integrity. Because once you do that, then you can get folks saying, okay, this guy really does know about his product, his service, or what they, whatever you happen to do, as opposed to just sharing mediocre content and expecting somebody to look at it and be completely enthralled. Just doesn't happen. So think about, what that you can share with folks that will be important to them. And so we help companies oftentimes craft a strategy around that to help them gain the followers and the traffic and all the other things. So starting a community. Oftentimes our clients do that through LinkedIn groups. It's easy to do. It takes all of 30 seconds to go into LinkedIn and set up a group around whatever you want to talk about. It could be recruiting, it could be IT, it could be very sort of niche-oriented content, and that's okay. Because over time, if you can begin inviting people to your group, and there's good discussion, ultimately it makes you look good. It gives them a platform to speak on, and it gives you a platform to speak on. So that's definitely something that helps garner trust, credibility, and all those things are important to look the part online.
I've got one question here for you.
Okay.
Someone is asking if it's better to start working on Twitter or LinkedIn.
That's a great question. We get that a fair amount, actually. I think LinkedIn is a little bit more intuitive to start on. We work with a lot of executives who just become frustrated with Twitter and they don't know quite how to use it. They only have 180 characters on Twitter and they don't know quite how to connect with people or what to say when they do connect with them. So I think for the most part, as you get into LinkedIn, there's a wider spectrum of people on LinkedIn. It's the de facto professional social network. The ROI on LinkedIn, people start seeing much more quicker. With Twitter, it's more of a longer-term strategy, and I think not all executives have warmed up to the idea of Twitter yet because they haven't quite figured it out. And certainly it depends on industry too. Advertising and marketing, certainly, everybody's on Twitter. Car dealers are on Twitter, insurance folks are on Twitter. But for the most part, I think if you're just starting out, LinkedIn can be incredibly valuable incredibly quickly. Once we've coached people on how to use LinkedIn, they tend to swear by it. And it takes a couple months to really get in the groove. But once you make it part of your repertoire, things that you do online, or just to get business in general, it tends to work better. So I would, it's a long-winded way of me saying, start with LinkedIn. Once you get comfortable using and communicating with people on LinkedIn regularly, then you can go to Twitter, and you can actually integrate Twitter to a degree on LinkedIn as well.
The next question I have is, how do you build a Twitter following if you're a credit union or a financial institution?
Ooh, okay. So we're actually, that's a great question. It's really tricky. We're working with a couple of, one in particular large financial services firm, and they actually are just putting their toe in the water. There's a lot of regulatory things that prevent them from speaking to the extent or broadcasting the type of information they would like to the extent that they would like to. I think if you're specifically in financial services, generally you want to have a social media policy in place first. The very few folks that we work with already in financial services, they spent a fair chunk of change working with an attorney to craft a social media policy. Once they did that, they had a training session with their financial advisors who are, chomping at the bit to start utilizing social media because their friends that worked in not so regulated industries have had really good results with it. But unfortunately, because of the type of environment that is, you've got to take a few more steps before you can start building that following. So let's say you've taken those steps, you've built a social media policy, and you're working within the framework that allows for. Then it's pretty straightforward. You can begin sending in. You can search for the right types of folks on LinkedIn. There's a tremendous amount of granularity you can go to. I've got a friend who's a financial advisor. He actually works in private wealth management, and he's a heavy networker. And what he does is he's done a good job of being able to find the high net worth individuals through his contacts on LinkedIn. So what he does is he looks at the folks that he's connected to, and he happens to be connected to higher level folks, VPs, CEOs, etc. on LinkedIn. And he looks at the people that they know. So in LinkedIn, you can go into connections that are related to connections that you're directly connected to. Okay, second level connections, third level connections, and you can ask for an introduction to that person, and then connect with them and say, hey, you're a great friend of Carl's. It seems like you're connected with him on LinkedIn, and turns out you and I went to the same college. Let's have a cup of coffee next week, and we can talk about it, et cetera, et cetera. It's a really sort of basic way to go about doing things on LinkedIn. On Twitter, same thing. You want to find those influencers. You want to find the people. You can utilize hashtags, and I can talk about those if there's an interest. But essentially, search for different terms, whether it be wealth management and a bunch of different keywords related to your industry. On Twitter, search for those terms and see who's talking about those. And then once you see who's talking about those terms, click on their profile. In a perfect world, what you want to do is find folks that have 100,000, 10,000, a lot more followers than you have, and ultimately broadcast content that you feel that they would like well enough to be able to share it, or find useful enough to be able to share it. A big win for one of our clients, we work for Giordano's Pizza here in Chicago. They've got 42 locations. Lady Gaga was in town, and she went to one of their pizza locations because it's right across the street from the Four Seasons. Well, next thing you know, Giordano's got 6,000 followers from that, and got a lot of traction. But anyway, long-winded way to say you can do that, but you just got to be careful.
Irfan, we've got another question, and it's a pretty good one. Better to have ownership of a small, engaged, niche LinkedIn, or to be a trusted voice in someone else's established? Could that be applicable even to a larger, older competitor?
So to make sure I understand what you're asking me, the question is really, is it better to own your small niche community on LinkedIn or be part of a larger community where you're not the owner, but you're a trusted voice within that community? Is that accurate?
You got it.
So in that scenario, honestly, the downside is negligible there. If you're part of somebody else's community and you've got a good relationship with them, and they're not going to, kick you out for any reason, and they've got access to 5,000, 10,000, a group that has quite a lot of people there, then that's okay. And then if people, are seeing your content and asking you questions, and that's fine. As long as you are getting your name out there and people feel that you're a credible, trusted source for information, don't take the time in that scenario to go build your own. You're already part of a network that allows you a platform to say all the great things and contribute in a meaningful way. It takes some time to build a group on LinkedIn. If I could be a part of a group that has 5,000 people and they're paying attention to me, that's great. I don't need to start from scratch and build my own over time to maybe 200 people or 500 people when I've got access and a platform somewhere else. So, in that scenario, I would probably take the position of being part of a larger group.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I appreciate everyone taking the time to be with us today. If anyone has any other questions, there will be a follow-up. You can send me an email and I will get it over to Irfan. Otherwise, thank you everyone for your time today. Irfan, again, thank you very much. And if you have any closing thoughts, let me know. Otherwise, appreciate everything.
No, thank you guys so much. It was a pleasure.